All right, we're ready to begin Basics of Biblical Hebrew, chapter 24. We'll start off with a Hebrew insight, as we usually do. We'll look at the workbook, see if there's any questions about that. We'll go over any translations that you might want to cover, and then we'll begin Niphal Stem Strong Verbs. This will be our first look at a derived stem. And I'll go ahead and kind of do a spoiler and say the nice thing about the way we're learning Hebrew, the way this grammar is organized, is that we don't have to go through and memorize a whole bunch of stuff again. All of our preformatives and subformatives still work. The pronominal suffixes are still the same. All we have to learn are the diagnostics for the Niphal stem. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. And then we'll go over the vocabulary. So for the Hebrew insight, when we were looking at pronouns, we saw this, talked about it some, I think, but when a pronoun is used with a verb, it gives emphasis. For instance, we have Yashav Ba'ir, Yashav Ba'ir, he dwelled in the city. But if you put a who on the front, remember who is he? So it'd be he dwelled in the city, but you would probably translate that as said he himself dwelled in the city, but it's emphatic that it's him and not somebody else, or that type of thing. It's more emphatic. We see this in scripture, like in Deuteronomy 4:35, where it says, Yahweh, he, and then we're going to have to insert is here because it's a verbless clause. He is God. There is not still or yet beside him or except him or something like that. But it's actually from, to, alone, him. From, to, alone, him, which doesn't make any sense in English, but it's used in the sense of besides. So Yahweh himself is God. There is not still besides him. 1 Kings 18:39, that's where Elijah prayed and God sent fire from heaven, and the people who were on Mount Carmel said, Yahweh, he, and again, we'll have to supply is God. Yahweh, he is God. So Yahweh himself is God. Yahweh himself is God. So we have this emphasis because the whole showdown there was who's God? Is Yahweh God or is Baal God? And so we see emphasis there. And with that, that's all background. With that, the real insight has to do with Isaiah 46 and the first four verses. We'll look at verses 1 and 2 on this page because it's a contrast between idols and Yahweh. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops. Their idols were on the beasts and on the cattle. In other words, they have animals carrying these idols around. Your carriages were heavily loaded, a burden to the weary beast. They stoop, they bow down together. They could not deliver the burden, but have themselves gone into captivity. So the idols can't do anything to help, and in fact, they are a burden to whatever has to carry them. And then we're going to contrast that to Yahweh, because the next couple of verses 3 and 4, Israel is carried by Yahweh, not animals. They're not carried by animals. So verse 3, listen to me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel, who have been upheld by me from birth, who have been carried from the womb. Okay, verse 4, this is the main one we're going to be looking at. Even to your old age, I am he, and even to gray hairs, I will carry you. I have made, and I will bear. Even I will carry and will deliver you. So we read the translation. We can ask, do we get it? Well, yeah, we get it. The translation gives us the basic meaning, but the emphasis is lacking. So how is it emphasized? Here's the Hebrew insight. Okay, until old age, I am he. And here's ani, I am he, all right? But then we say, until gray hair, I, and then the olive here is the preformative for the imperfect. So it's I will carry. I will carry. Sure, I myself will carry. And we have ani, I. Again, this time we have the pronominal, or not the pronominal, the subformative on a perfect subformative for first person singular. So I made, I myself made. And we have ani again, and again we have this aleph. there's a noon here, nasa. The noon becomes this dagesh here. And so I myself will carry, will lift. That's, yeah, lift. The memory device for that, NASA, if you think of NASA, carrying satellites in space or something. But anyway, the Aleph is the preformative again. And once again, we have the Aleph preformative. In fact, it's the same verb as up here. Ani, I will carry. And so by putting this into the translation we're looking at, even to your old age, I am he, even to gray hairs, I myself will carry you. I myself have made, and I myself will bear, and even I myself will carry and will deliver you. Stark contrast to the idols that were carried by pack animals. And so, yeah, we get the translation, we understand it, and it's not that it's wrong, but what we miss in the translation is the emphasis that's given to us in Hebrew, and that is why you read Hebrew. All right. Any questions on chapter 23 in the workbook? The if I took a peek at the answer key, and they did give the parts of the labels, as it were, verb, subject, indirect object, direct object. It had those, but it didn't have the translation. So if you had a translation you were wondering about, let me know and we'll go over that translation. Before that, though, on page 97, number 5, we have Amar. That's the next to last word of number 5, 2 Samuel 7:5. Amar, the next to last word, that is not listed in the answer key, but that is a perfect. It should be should have a P or something to indicate that that's a perfect. And again, in the next section, Roman numeral 3, same page, number 2, third to the last word, he will sit, yeshev. That's an imperfect. That was not indicated in the answer key either. So, were there any questions about the translations? If so, we'll go over those because there's a whole lot of them, but they're all real short. Okay, I don't hear of any, so we will move on to chapter 24, the Niphal Stem Strong Verbs. Okay, just a little bit of review. A Hebrew root is the origin or simplest form from which words are derived. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Composed of consonants only. I mean, this goes way back to when we were looking at nouns for the first time. That was chapter 4. Hypothetical. Why are some of the roots hypothetical? Because some words do not appear in the call stem. We only have derived stems, and so we never ever see them with just their root. So we just work backwards, and we end up with what the root should be. Oftentimes in a lexicon, you can tell those because they will not have vowels. You'll just have the 3 letters with no vowels, and most everything else in the lexicon does have the vowels. Those are the ones where they've had to go back and say, well, this is the root, but it never ever appears in the call, in the call stem. A stem is the most basic form of any word derived from a root. Okay, so we've seen this before. In fact, I took this slide, as you can see at the top, it came from chapter 12. We have the root mem lamed kaf. From that, we can make nouns like king, melech, or we malka, queen, king, queen, and malkut, kingdom. Or we can also make verbs like he reigned, malach, he reigned. Or this is a he feel. And you can tell it's a he feel. I know we're not going to talk about that for a few weeks, but we have the he on the front and the the uric yod there. That's just the diagnostics for he feel. But that's a causative stem, and so it means he caused him to be king, or he caused him to reign, or something like that. But it's still a word based off of the mem, lamed, kaf root. Most Hebrew roots have 3 letters. We looked at king, the root for king. Devar, this is a word. Rosh, that's a head. Or shafat, that's judge. Whether you're talking about a judge or one judging, or he judged, whether it comes out of a verb, participle, whether it comes out as a noun, all of these, devar could be a word, it could be speaking. All of these are the roots. Not all Hebrew letter words can be boiled down to 3-letter roots, but the majority do. So we have our root that we've been working with, katal, but it's just kof, tape, lamed. And from that we get the kal stem, which basically all we do is add a couple of vowels to it, the comets and the patak there. So we ended up with katal, and that's what we've been looking at all along. And we've studied the kal in great detail, because what we learn in the kal is going to apply to all of the others. We don't have to relearn all that again. So we want to make sure we covered that well. But we're going to be looking at the derived stems now. They're going to be based off of the kal. And so for katal, he killed, we can find that in all of these stems. Here we've got have it broken up a little bit. Those are easy, and just the last ones on that. So we can find the stem there, the kal stem there, but things have been added to it. I'm not going to go through all of these I have before. We'll do that again as we get to each one. But notice the Niphal. We have knee, fall, knee, fall. That's Niphal. I'm not pronouncing the word Niphal. I'm just saying that's how we can tell what it is. That's the diagnostic. What I just circled here, here and here. That's our diagnostic. How you can tell when you're looking at a Niphal. The kal stem is used more than any. In fact, it's like 69% of all the verbal forms in the Hebrew scriptures. So all of these will be less, but that's why we study. That's another reason why we study kal first, because it's by far the most prevalent. Okay, diagnostics. I mentioned that word before. Again, you notice that this is from chapter 12. This is also a review diagnostic. That comes from Greek. Gnostic is knowledge. Dia means through knowledge. And that's how we're going to work this. You don't have to go through and rememorize a whole bunch of charts of words. All we have to learn are the diagnostics. What do you look for? And this thing about diagnostics, that was back in chapter 12, page 117. You don't have to look at it now. So why are there so many stems? We have all these derived stems. In fact, that we don't have all the stems listed. We have the major ones. There are some variants to those, but they all kind of have the same types of things in common. Sometimes they're based off of like for instance, off of a hollow root. We'll use a different thing, a different stem than most all the other words do. And we can talk about those in a few weeks. But stems, why are there so many? Because they express voice and action. Voice tells us how the action is related to the subject. If it's active, it means the subject's doing it. He broke. That'd be shavar. He broke. If it's passive, it was broken. If it's reflexive, it broke itself. Okay, so that's what voice tells us. It's how is the action related to the subject. So it's either the subject is doing the action, the action is happening to the subject, or the subject is acting upon themselves. Okay, then the action, we have simple, which is what we've been looking at with kal. He broke. There's intensive, he smashed, or he shattered, or something like that, intensive. And then there's causative, he caused it to break. So those are the types of action, and that's why we have the different stems. So what English does by adding words, Hebrew does by changing stems. So we have the simple, causative, and intensive uh, actions, and we have the voice, the active, passive, reflective voice, and that's how they lay out the different stems. And so you say, well, what does a hopeful do? Well, a hopeful is going to be passive, and it's going to be causative. So it was caused. It's going to be passive. It was caused to happen, and so forth. That's what that chart is for. And we're going to be looking at these two. Notice the Niphal does double duty. Call only has one, although there is a call passive. We've looked at call passive participles, for instance. He feel there's no reflexive. Something doesn't cause itself to do something. That you don't get that. So causative and then intensive, we have the PL, PUL, and heat palel. We have one for each type, for each voice. These are voice on this side. But Niphal covers two different kinds. Probably passive is going to be the most common. Okay, what English does by adding words, Hebrew does by changing stems. Like he broke, there's shavar. That's how you say he broke. That's call. Yep, call. It was broken. Nishbar. Nishbar is going to be Niphal. It broke itself. Well, that's still going to be Niphal, because this Niphal is passive. This Niphal, this Niphal is reflexive. Okay, it broke itself. He smashed. Okay, that's shiber. That's going to be the PL. It was smashed. That's still intensive, but it's passive. That's going to be the pual. So it's shubar is a pual. It smashed itself. That's going to be the heat palel. And heat palel. He caused to break, going to be the heat fill. And it was caused to break. That's passive. That's going to be the hopeful. And the reason why we have some in gray there is because these particular forms of shavar are not in the scripture. Now, the rest of them are, but those last three are not. However, what's true for shavar has happened is going to be true for a whole lot of other words. It follows that pattern. Okay, learning objectives will understand the basic meanings of Niphal verbs. When they'll translate Niphal verbs and identify Niphal strong verbs. We're also going to look at that special section at the end of the chapter 2 on the bottom. If they're not listed, it's not on this list. So the basic meanings of Niphal verbs. So we've had a chart like this before, and we had the conjugations listed. We had the root, we had the stem, and then down here we had the conjugations. In this case, though, we're looking at derived stems. So from the call, we will derive all the others, the Niphal, PL, PUL, Hethil, Hopeful, and Hepalel. So we're looking at the Niphal. Why do we call it that? Okay, we're going to talk about that. Why do we call it Niphal? Where do these weird names come from? Well, Ni is right here. Ni and fall. So, and that's how you pronounce this word, Niphal. That's the word for work, or even it's a word that's used for verb. So we take the word for work or verb, and then we make the changes to it for passive and reflexive simple action. And we end up with Niphal. Okay? Verbs are action or a state of being. He is happy, or let's say the stated statement. Verbs do the work of the language, and po'al is the Hebrew word for work. And as I said, it's also used for the word for verb. So the names of the Hebrew verbal stems, this is a review again from chapter 12, you'll notice from the top, is call. That means simple or light. And then we see a consistency here: Niphal, Hephil, Hophal, Hiel, Pual, Hepalel. And here's what they look like in Hebrew: Call, Nephal, Hephil, Hophal, Hiel, Pual, Hepal. You can see the root of the word for work in here. Well, we have a Hirik Yod that interrupts this one, but you still have the root there. You still have the root there, and there. And something happened. We put stuff on the front or we put something in the middle. Those are the diagnostics that we're going to be using for each one of the stems. But that's why we give them the names, because it's based on all of these, not called, but all the rest of them. All the derived stems are based on the pei, ayin, lamed, root, polal. And so that's where these names come from. It's what happens to the word for verb or work to demonstrate that verb stem. Okay, and so we're going to concentrate on Niphal passive initially, where we're going to keep Niphal passive. So Niphal is still simple action, but it's passive instead of active. With call, we've been looking at active. So for call, we have katal, he killed. But for passive, niktal, notice the ni and the ni, That's our diagnostic. Niktal means he was killed. He was killed. Passive. That's what I said by adding words. So we add the word was to make it passive in English. In Hebrew, they don't have to add a word. All they do is change the stem. Another word, shema, he heard. The passive for the Niphal, it comes out nishma. It means he was heard. Again, we add the word was to make it passive in English. But in Hebrew, you don't have to add any words. You just use a different verb stem. Okay, now Niphal can also be reflexive. So again, it's still simple action. That didn't change, but now we also have this opportunity for reflexive action. So Shema is still we heard. And Nishma, which looks exactly like the other screen did, but it's going to be he heard himself. He heard himself. Because it's reflexive. The action is on the subject on himself. Okay, Niphal, again, still simple action, but they also can be reciprocal. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I had some on my mind. This is the only one I've got here, but I think another good example is when David hid from Saul. If it was passive, it was David was hidden. If it was reflexive, David hid himself. That's another example of the difference between the two. All right, going back to this, still simple action, but it can be reciprocal action. And so Shama'u, they heard. And then Nishma'u is they heard each other. That's reciprocal. You have two parties, and this action is happening back and forth here. It's going in a circle between these two. And some verbs just are naturally, they can't be done. Like take the word fighting. When I would get into trouble with my mother because my brothers and I were fighting, well, it's probably them, not me. No, it was me too. My mother always said, it takes two to tango. Takes two to tango. And so fighting, if you only have one entity, it's pretty hard to do any fighting. It's hard to do that. But if you have two, then the fighting takes place between the two. And so there are nouns, and we'll just translate them into active. This will get mentioned a little bit later too. But it's because they are naturally words that are naturally requiring at least two entities. Some verbs don't fit into the English categories of passive or reflexive. Nilcham, there's the Niphal of lacham. Lacham is to fight. But I don't think that lacham ever appears in the call. I think I'm going to say it probably always occurs. It may be that it always occurs in the Niphal form. These will often be translated like active verbs. So he fought. You wouldn't say he was fought. He was foughted. He was. He was fought. He fought. He fought. Nimlat, he escaped. Presumably, there's something you have a party, but there's something he's escaping from, to get away. Again, it kind of assumes that there's another entity involved. Some call those middle preference verbs, but that's another one that may have some. Well, I don't remember. I won't say. I just don't remember. But anyway, that's another one you'll commonly find in Niphal. So, to identify, well, that's kind of the most important thing here. Now, this chart's a little bit more familiar. We did this for the call stem, but now we're looking at a derived stem. We're looking at the Niphal stem. So instead of katal, we're looking at niktal. And the conjugations that we look at, we're still going to look at the same ones. We took a week to look at each one of these individually. But I just want to point out the ni here and the ah. And then here we have the noon dropped out, but we got the dagesh right there in the middle of the kof. Same way here. Noon dropped out, but we have the dagesh in the R1 letter. Dagesh. Here we have the ni. Here we have the dagesh. This infinitive absolutes can go either way. And then ni again. So the ni is what you're looking for, and if the ni isn't there, you're looking for the remnant of that noon that dropped out. So we're going to be looking at all the conjugations in the Niphal stem for strong verbs. The key to identifying Niphal verb is identifying the noon prefix. A prefix is not the same thing as a preformative. Preformatives, that means it's going to be an imperfect verb, imperfect conjugation. So here's niktal. That's our diagnostic. We're looking for ni, and we're also looking for the ah. And this is the Niphal perfect. So for perfect, which means you're only going to have subformatives. You never have a preformative in the perfect conjugation. So that's what we're looking for is the ni and the ah, the patak there. So what I want to do yourself a favor, get the big picture, don't get bogged down in the details. The Niphal strong summary at the bottom of page 270. So flip to 270. And we're going to save time. We're going to look at this. We're going to look at the big picture, and then I won't spend much time on some of the smaller snapshots. So if we're looking at the bottom of page 270, we have the perfect column is the leftmost column, and we have the diagnostic niktal, it's in red. But just scan down through that list. You see ni all the way through, and then the patak. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. So mostly the thing that you're mostly going to look for is the ni. That noon hirik beginning. Next column, the imperfect. Now we have something different. We've got preformatives. All the imperfects have preformatives. So the yiktal with that dagesh and the kof, that's our diagnostic. So if you go down looking through here, kof with the dagesh all the way down through here, kof with the dagesh. And since we're only studying the strong verbs this week, we're not looking at any gutturals. We'll look at those next week. We have weak verbs and what happens in that case. But you can see we have the noon is there in that we have it represented by the dagesh in the kof, the R1 letter all the way through. For the imperative, we end up with a he on the front, but look at the kof. We have the dagesh all the way through. Infinitive construct. Again, we have the he on the front, but we have the dagesh in the kof. Now, in infinitive absolute, I mentioned just a little bit ago, it can go either way. You either have the ni or you'll have the dagesh in the kof, one or the other. And then participle. If you look all the way down through the list, you got ni all the way through. That's what you want to look for. And that's the main thing to remember. I mean, if you can remember that, you've successfully passed this lesson. You'll either see the ni, the noon break, or you're going to see a dagesh in the R1 letter, the root 1 letter. So with that, we have a perfect verb plus the ni and the schwa. That's going to equal the Niphal perfect. So we have katal, and we're going to add Niphal, and it's going to become niktal. That's what we have to be able to recognize, just the diagnostic. Since we're talking about perfect, we're talking about subformatives only, and tem is the second masculine plural subformative. So that would be you all killed, but we're going to add the ni and the schwa to it, and it's going to be you all will be killed, or you all were killed. That doesn't make sense, but that's what it is. You all were killed. That's passive, but we still see the ni, and we do have the comets. I'm sorry, patak. You have the patak under the tab, and the tem subformative. That doesn't change. Preformatives, subformatives do not change. We'll be carrying those all the way with us through to the end of the book. Okay, and you can look at the Niphal perfect paradigm on page 265. We're not going to take the time to do it now. We looked at the big picture already. The key to identifying a Niphal verb is identifying the noon prefix. Okay. There's one problem with identifying the noon, because the yod, vav, noon, and hey, we know what happens to those letters. They drop out. So in a Niphal strong verb, a noon prefix that drops out will show up as a dagesh or te in the root one letter. No, that's perfect. Going on to the imperfect conjugation. This is not what it looks like. This is what we'd be inclined to do. If there's a preformative, and if you're looking at an imperfect, it's going to have a preformative. Half of them have subformatives, but it's going to have a preformative for sure. The preformative comes before the noon prefix, but the noon will drop out, and we get the dagesh in the kof, in the root one letter. So we end up with yikatel. So that's our diagnostic. Yikatel. And you can see the imperfect paradigm on 266, but we looked at the big picture. I'm not going to take time to do that now. But it is in your book. For imperfects, you have the same preformatives, same subformatives as the call imperfect. Nothing changes there. So for the imperfect, we have yiptol, he will kill. But we have yikatel, notice the dagesh and the kof. We still have the 3ms preformative, still have the 3ms preformative. That doesn't change. So on one side, we're going to have he will kill, and for the Niphal, he will be killed. Then for feminine, she will kill, tiktolma. She will be killed. She will be killed. Nope, I've messed that up. She will kill. She will kill. That's the call imperfect. The Niphal, she will be killed. But again, the preformatives are the same. Preformatives are the same. We have the dagesh in the R1 letter. And so that's where the noon went. So she will be killed. So we have the assimilated noon in the kof, and we have the assimilated noon in the kof. And we have a long A vowel, first consonant, A stem. So those are things to look for to identify the Niphal in the imperfect. The key to identifying a Niphal verb is identifying the noon prefix, whether it's there or whether it gets drops out and leaves a dagesh behind. So the one on the left is a perfect, and the one on the right is an imperfect. But both he will be killed, he was killed, or he will be killed. In all Niphal strong verbs, the noon prefix will show itself in one of these two ways, either the dagesh, or the ni, or the dagesh. He was killed, he will be killed. For the imperative, key to identifying a Niphal is look for the noon prefix. Imperatives are based on the imperfects. So we have tikatail. It becomes tikatail. So that's our diagnostic. Tikatail. Be killed, because it's an imperative. And the imperative paradigm's on page 267, but we looked at the big picture, so we're going to move on. So the imperfect, we're going to have the tav and the hey for an imperative. Niphal imperfect. Tikatail. Again, we're going to notice this is the 2MS or 3FS preformative, and we've got the dagesh for the noon that dropped out. So for the imperfect, we have tikatail. For the imperative, we have ikatail. For the infinitive construct, ikatail. Well, that looks like the imperative, doesn't it? So how do you tell them apart? Context. That's always going to be true, context. But another way to tell them apart is, if you remember, 85% of all the infinitive constructs have inseparable pronouns. Prepositions, have inseparable prepositions. So it'll say lehikatail. And so if we translate that word as to be killed, or in order to be killed, I would just say to be killed. Infinitive, to be killed. The Niphal infinitive absolute. And again, the way to identify them is the noon prefix, and it'll show itself in one of two ways. It'll be niktol, or it'll be hikatol. It could appear either way, but you either see the ni, the O vowel, that's our clue that we're looking at an infinitive absolute here. And you have that in both. On this side, we have the dagesh where the noon dropped out, hikatol or niktol. So that's all you have to remember for infinitive absolute. You're still just looking for the Niphal there, the noon, where it's dropped out. Infinitive absolutes can use either form. Translate this clause. So the one on the right, because we're reading obviously this way, from right to left. Hikatol, so that's going to be to be killed. And then ye, there's our third masculine singular preformative. There's our noon, it's passive. So he will be killed. To be killed, he will be killed. Or to smooth it out in English, you could just translate it as he will surely be killed, because the infinitive absolute is used as a for emphasis. And then the Niphal participle. The strong verb diagnostics, niktal, being killed. And that paradigm is on page 269. Participles also, you'll want to notice they have noun endings. All right, so that's all of those. Now we want to look at this the disjunctive vowels. That actually is picked up after the vocabulary. So we're going to come back to vocabulary on page 271 here in just a little bit. But just to kind of cover basically this disjunctive vowel, I'm not sure why they put that after the vocabulary. I guess because it's just a different topic. It is a different topic. Doesn't have really anything to do with Niphal verb stems. Oh, by the way, while we got that page open, on the right, starting on page 273, we have something you should know. And, I've warned you about a couple of them that I didn't feel were good. I think this one's pretty good. So almost all of them are pretty good. It's just mostly those two that I have some problems with. So we want to understand the disjunctive vowel. So a conjunctive vowel, we studied that in chapter 5, and we learned about the vowel consecutive in chapter 17, but on page 272, it talks about the disjunctive vowel. And that just means disjunctive means it separates it. And that's pretty easy. There's really not a lot to remember here either. It's in fact, we've kind of talked about it a little bit in the past anyway. It's usually a conjunctive vowel is prefixed to a verb. It'll only be prefixed to verbs. That's the only way you have a conjunctive vowel. Okay. And it links clauses in a sequential or logical manner. Disjunctive vowel disrupts that. It's fixed to a non-verb and interrupts the narrative. So that's the quickest way that you can tell that it's a disjunctive vowel. It's going to be, it will not be on a verb. So looking at Genesis 6, 5, and 7, we have, and he saw Yahweh. So we have a verb, subject. And he regretted, verb, subject, Yahweh. And he said, verb, subject here. So these are things that happened in a row. Yahweh saw, and Yahweh regretted, and Yahweh said. Now the disjunctive vowel comes up in verse 8. And Noah, he found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. So that disrupts this, this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and then you have a vowel like this, and it interrupts it. And then later on, you'll have another vowel consecutive, and say, okay, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and it separates the vowel. Disjunctive vowels introduce disjunctive clauses. So again, we have the same one. And the next thing, and Yahweh saw, and Yahweh regretted, and Yahweh said, and then, and Noah. And this disjunctive vowel here, down bracing. Disjunctive clauses include parenthetical statements. You might translate it as now. I don't usually, but can. But it can be something that's inserted as if it was in parentheses. It can be circumstantial, and it can be contrastive, but it could be introductory, now, but they're always prefixed to non-verbs. All right, now let's go with vocabulary. Flip back to page 271. The first one, Aman. This has, faithfulness, trustworthiness, trusting, believing. Emunah, the word for believe, is based on this word. Amen, or amen, as we say, or amen, however different people say that. That's based on this word. And so, it has this idea of trustworthiness and faithfulness. Next word, Yasha, to be delivered. Yatar, Yatar means to be left over, to remain. Kun is established, or making something steadfast, maybe even arranging something. Lacham um, means to fight. Well, it looks like, okay, it says rare in the call. That's what the Q means there. It's rare in the call. So I don't even remember seeing it. I must have seen it at some point. Most of the time it's going to be Niphal. Lacham is to fight. Malat is to escape or to flee. We had these earlier in the lesson. Nacham, we had that in the lesson too, to be sorry, to regret. Nacha, notice it's got a noon, or well, some of these other two, like Nacham, but Nacha, this is a pretty common word, 501 times it says. Well, you see that one noon, and guess what? Yes, that does drop out. And we see the three hey, and guess what? Yes, that does drop out too. So a whole lot of the times when you come across this word, the only root letter you're going to find is the cough. But it's really, that may sound like, how in the world am I ever going to recognize it? It's not that hard. You will, when we start reading through the scriptures, you'll get used to this. Just that's one of the curious things about, not curious, but one of the unique things about this word. It means to strike. Because there's so much striking going on. So somebody's striking somebody, or an army is striking another army, or something. And then next word, natsav, to take your stand. Natsal, to be rescued or delivered or saved. I'd say like delivered. The memory device for Natsal, you could maybe count on David to deliver you, but not Saul. Not Saul. You can't depend on Saul to deliver you, not Saul. So anyway, if that helps you remember, he delivered. Satar is to be hidden or to hide yourself. Like I said, the Niphal could be, I used that as an example earlier. You can hide, or you can be hidden rather, or you can hide yourself. Roots means to run. Shachat means to destroy. And then Shemad also is referring to some kind of a destruction as well. Any questions? All right, then the homework is to memorize chapter 24 vocabulary. Go ahead and do your workbook, exercise 24, and then go ahead and read 25. Now, 25 is going to be on weak verbs, Niphal weak verbs. So, well, we'll talk about that next time. Any final questions? All right, then we'll be done.